So I think it's time we talk about sailing. The skill has been out for 2 weeks now, and today we just received our first set of major balancing changes to the update, and they are incredibly controversial. And I have a lot of thoughts on those changes and the skill as a whole, so today I wanted to take a rare chance to just give you my opinion on sailing, and I would like to cover the whole skill as well as today's changes. Now, as someone who voted for sailing, I have actually really enjoyed training the skill. There's a lot the skill does right, from the sound, the areas, the exploration, charting. I could honestly gush about the skill quite a lot, but there's no doubt there is, let's put it, some pretty significant room for improvement, and that's mostly what we're going to be focusing on today. But that's not to say I don't like the skill in general. And I think we should start with today's update because it is very controversial. Honestly, people are pretty pissed. And I'll give a quick summary on what actually changed. Mostly a nerf to the crystal extractor and to salvaging. Now, I think most people thought that the extractor was going to be nerfed in some capacity. Although Jagex said they would take the experience from the extractor, put it somewhere else. They just kind of forgot that last part. Personally, I think the extractor should be nerfed, or you could just remove the XP altogether, honestly, I don't really care. They mentioned a few times that one of the reasons the crystal extractor exists at all is to help make some of the lower XP rates more competitive with stuff like Barracuda trials. But that doesn't make sense to me at all. Like, just make the individual methods higher XP. So what did they do? Well, they reduced the XP you get every minute from harvesting the crystal extractor from 600 down to 250, which is over a 50% nerf. So instead of getting upwards of like 34k an hour, you're getting like 14k an hour. So pretty significant. But probably the more egregious change and the one that people are more annoyed about is the nerf to salvaging. Now, there's a lot of small things and some big things they've done to salvaging that have all decreased the XP rate. There's actually a lot of moving parts. It's kind of interesting. For example, the crew members were actually apparently bugged and were looking for salvage faster than your actual player could. I think it was like 3 ticks for the crewmates, 4 ticks for the player. So they fixed that, as well as making the player now salvage in a 5-tick cycle, which has further decreased the XP rates. But probably the biggest change is actually to sorting the salvage. The XP you get per sort is actually kind of gutted when you look at it, mostly at the higher levels. Merchant salvaging went from 95 XP to 34, Fremennik salvage from 75 to 32. It's weird, you get an extra 2 XP for each higher salvage in later levels. It feels kind of weird. There's some other balancing tweaks as well, but kind of what this boils down to is if you were taking advantage of a full 30-minute AFK method, which was like hands off keyboard, you just come back to sort the salvage 2 or 3 times an hour. That used to give you about 50k per hour sailing XP, and now it's closer to 30k. If you were manning the hook and tapping your crystal extractor and sorting the salvage, previously that could get you up to like 110, 120k even, and now it gives like 80 or 90k. So some pretty significant nerfs to salvaging. Now, did salvaging need to be nerfed? Well, in my opinion, yes, it kind of did. Or at the very least, it needed to be positioned differently within the sailing training hierarchy than it currently was. Now, something I started to kind of notice and feel once I got into like the late 70s, 80s for sailing is there's really only 2 actually viable training methods out there: shipwreck salvaging and Barracuda trials. Barracuda trials were straight up just the fastest way to train a skill, and notably faster than most other options, so that's fine. But when it came to the other options, the value proposition got kind of weird. You could do port tasks, and yeah, some people have reported that you can get upwards of 140k per hour. But for when I was testing, that requires pretty optimal task setup, and it's very inconsistent. Sometimes the board just gives you a bunch of terrible tasks and you have to reset it, doing really short port tasks. It's kind of awkward, inconsistent. More realistically, you're getting about 100k per hour at higher levels. You could do bounty tasks, and once again, the best you could kind of get out of that is around 100k per hour, while spending money to do it as well. Or lastly, you could do shipwreck salvaging, which once again gets you around 100k per hour, but is way more chill, 100% consistent, and would even earn you some money along the way as well. So it became the de facto option for people who didn't want to do Barracuda trials. So it kind of boiled down after the first week. The majority of players were doing either Barracuda trials or shipwreck salvaging, which I will highlight. Both of those are kind of self-isolated. The only true sailing training methods where you go around the world, interact with a map, make the ocean look populated, are really the courier missions, bounties, and charting, and the 2 repeatable methods are not popular, not worth doing. So I do think salvaging did need a nerf. Now what I'd hoped they would do is actually just make the crystal extractor only work while you're moving, essentially cutting it out of salvaging altogether. This would have actually nerfed the XP here by kind of a similar amount, but doesn't lead to a weird incentive where players feel like they have to drop their salvage. I don't get that. Why is it better XP now to drop salvage on the ground? Sorting it was already more intensive than most of the other parts of salvaging. You had to manage your inventory, drop things on the ground. So I think sorting should be still better XP. I also noticed that at least at merchant salvaging, they've added in 3 double spots, or 6 in total. Now it's nice having more double spots, but now only 3 out of the 6 wrecks are active instead of 3 out of the 5 of them, which is also kind of another nerfed AFKing because you have less active wrecks at a time. Now, there's been so much pushback, they've actually already addressed some of these problems in the blog post. What I'm hoping they do is they can keep the full 30-minute AFKing the way it is. That's fine. It's literally the most AFK method in the entire game. I think 30k an hour is fine. But I think when you're actively at the salvaging hook, sorting things at the salvaging station, dropping things on the ground, going to your chest, emptying the salvage, that's more intensive and I think should reward closer to what it did pre-nerf than what it does now. Okay, so just as we're editing this video, Jagex published another blog related to sailing XP rates because they got so much pushback yesterday. They are going to quickly be putting in some fixes for salvaging. So the biggest one is they're going to be restoring the sorting XP to pre-nerf levels. Thank God for that because some of these were such big nerfs. So sorting will now give the same XP as it did pre-nerf. They're going to be increasing the number of active shipwrecks by 1. So 4 out of 6 shipwrecks will be active at a time. Love it. They're going to retain the increased salvaging success chance from this week's game update and restore the player's salvaging rate back to 4 ticks. So everything is just going to be faster, but 20%. However, to still knock down full AFK salvaging, they're going to be pretty significantly reducing the XP you get from your crewmates. So deck handiness 4 is going from 70% down to 40%. Deck handiness 3 is going from 60% to 30%. So what this kind of boils down to is the AFK double crewmate, like full 30-minute go watch a movie method is now nerfed by about 30% from its pre-adjustment levels. If you're sorting the salvage, manning the hook, it's just a very minor nerf of about 5%, which I think is much fairer than Wednesday's changes. Now, port tasks is another thing I've done a fair bit of, and you can do courier or bounty tasks. We'll start with the courier tasks. It really is fun actively sailing between a bunch of different ports, exploring the seas of Gillinor, and you get to even do these random events for sailing in between, which I think are interesting. But for courier tasks, the issue is that there's only really one type of task that is worth doing. People are calling them ABA tasks or retrieval tasks. Essentially, you go from this port to another port and bring something back. The assumption being that you sail both ways, so the experience is, I think, doubled or just heavily increased. But the meta is you grab a task from a port requiring you to retrieve something, you teleport to the other side of the map, summon your boat, grab the supplies and sail back, thus cutting off half the journey. To get the somewhat competitive rates for courier tasks, we're talking in like the low 100k range, like 100 to 120k maybe. You get the bulk of your experience from these ABA tasks. The problem is it ends up being very inconsistent. If you go to a notice board at any one time, normally like 3 or 4 options on there will not even be courier tasks, they'll be bounty tasks, so that already knocks out like half of them, and then the rest are just single direction tasks, which again aren't really worth doing unless you're kind of already en route. So when you're starting it, you really only have like 1, 2, maybe 3 options to choose from if you're lucky. So there's not actually that much variety. I think this could be helped out by either having a separate task page for bounty tasks and courier tasks. That's one sticking point I keep coming up with. Another annoying thing that I don't really see the point of at all is, for some reason, if you happen to get 2 deliveries that are delivering the same item, even if they're not the exact same delivery, like if you just need to deliver bananas for 2 tasks, it just will not let you do it, which I think is stupid. Either make each task a unique item so this issue doesn't come up, or just let us deliver more than 1 item at a time. Another issue that comes up with only realistically being able to do ABA tasks is there's not a huge variety in places that you can effectively do port tasks, at least in the like mid to late game. Mostly you're relegated to doing Lunar Island runs or Fremenic runs. or in the early game you can go to the summer shore, but you're kind of relying on a few of these primo tasks, and the other ones are just kind of fill in, which means you're never actually sailing around places you haven't been before. You're kind of sailing the same route over and over and over again with very mild variations. Now in my opinion, this is mostly a symptom of the summon boat spell. It kind of just breaks port tasks, and I do get why it exists. Having to sail everywhere in the game would be kind of tedious. I'm not sure the best way to solve this problem, but it would be nice if the one-way routes were a little more competitive and maybe tone down the ABA experience. Maybe meet a little closer in the middle, but overall boost up the rates. Another way I guess you could balance it is by making the summon boat spell either a higher level spell, or maybe adding in sailing requirements to be able to teleport your boat to different ports, kind of slowly unlocking the ports as you get higher level. There are definitely some balancing levers here, but I don't really know how to balance this game. But I do feel like it would be a lot more fun if you could just go to any port you wanted, one direction, and still get competitive rates. Now with today's update, the one thing they actually did technically buff is courier tasks. They buffed any task above 40 by 15%. Now this is an actual legitimate buff for levels 40 to 73, but once you get the crystal extractor, it's actually about the same as before, because the extractor was nerfed by about 20k per hour, and that's roughly what a 15% buff is, so they kind of cancel each other out. Ironically, I think those 40 to 73 level range actually was fine. It was actually more competitive then. I think the higher levels was what needed the buff. In the end, I would be pretty happy if the average XP rate for late game courier tasks was somewhere in the like 150k range. And then if you get really lucky, get good tasks, screw it, maybe you can get 200k an hour. Other times if you get unlucky, you're getting 100k per hour, but maybe evens out in the 150k range. Another option is to just make the random events you get on the ocean heavily scale with your sailing level and actually be really good XP, which would buff both the courier missions and I guess charting as well. Now bounty tasks are really being hamstringed by just how awkward ship combat is, so maybe we'll talk about that first. Right now, operating your cannons while doing bounty tasks is awkward and expensive. Because you have to have the cannons on either side of the boat, you either have to perfectly line up your ship with a, I think 3x3 monster or larger to get both the cannons firing at the same time, or if you're attacking multiple monsters, you have to like alternate on this eye icon to make sure your crewmates continue to attack. It is really clunky. So I think two pretty easy solutions for this is just let us build our two cannons on the same side of the boat. So you can just line up the boat and both the NPCs are easily in range of the thing you're attacking. And there should be a setting for your crewmates to attack anything in sight, regardless of what you're attacking. Those two fixes alone would make it much less clunky. The other problem is it's expensive. Now they could make cannonballs more available, which I think could help, but I would actually be kind of stoked just to get like an Ava's upgrade for your boat, like some sort of facility or upgrade you could get. It could be expensive, but it just saves your cannonballs. It could be 75, 80, 90%. But we need something because you just hemorrhage money killing most things at sea. Now as for the bounty tasks themselves, they're kind of weirdly balanced as far as experience rates go. This is mostly through the complete disregard for a monster's hit points when they decided how much XP a task would give. Like an Eagle Ray has 50 HP, gives like 10% less XP than an Orca or a Kraken. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't think bounty tasks have to be competitive XP necessarily, but I think at least the higher tier bounty tasks that actually have profitable monsters to kill should give at least the same amount of experience as lower tier bounty tasks to make them feel properly rewarding for getting a higher sailing level. Now I wanted to touch on the crew management system briefly because in general I think it's actually a pretty well thought out system. It's actually reasonably intuitive, but I still think there could be some improvements. Now there are 10 recruitable crewmates in Gielinor, and each of them have a combination of 3 stats: helmsmanship, privateering, and deckhandiness. Each of these traits helps out on your boat in a different way. So I think the system is good, but the level you unlock the different crewmates at, I find to be kind of weird. For one, their strength seems to be somewhat balanced around a quest completion and not so much a sailing level requirement. For example, ex-Captain Siad is just objectively better than Adventurer Ada, even though Adventurer Ada has a higher sailing requirement but doesn't require a quest. Or Jittery Jim being worse than Oarswoman Olga, even though it's a 5 level difference. But more than that, I found when I was leveling up and getting new crewmates, I always kind of had what I needed, which in some ways is nice, but for example, we get to level 50 sailing and we can buy ourselves a sloop. Well, at that level, immediately you have a captain who can pilot the sloop, so you never really have to go without. Yes, you can get a higher level helmsmanship crewmate at level 90, but I would say that's arguably the least useful trait, because the only difference between helmsmanship 3 and 4 is a 10% increase in when they trim the sail, which is not that useful or very much experience. Probably the most useful trait is actually deck handiness. Now, until yesterday, there was actually only one crewmate with deck handiness 4, and that was Captain Boyd Jenkins, making him the most powerful crewmate that you can unlock at level 60. However, there is a second one now, which is unlocked at level 85, so that's a bit of an improvement. And the final trait, Privateering, the two strongest crewmates for that are unlocked by level 70. I didn't really do much ship combat until those levels anyway. It's not a huge issue, but I never really felt that I was working towards unlocking one of these crewmates. And I never really felt myself getting stronger or benefit from unlocking them because I already had essentially the best crewmate for the job pretty early. And when it comes to crewmate management, being a jack of all trades does not matter at all, so being something like Bosun Zara, it doesn't really matter that they have 8 trait points. They're actually worse than someone with only 6 because you can only assign them to do one task at a time. Now next up here we have sea charting. Now I loved charting the oceans, especially the northern oceans, because you actually got a lot of experience for it. I think sea charting is pretty much a or A+ in my eyes, but there's a few things I would change. Mostly the current duck. I don't know why this duck has to go so far sometimes, but the final current I had to track in the Northern Ocean I think took 4 minutes. There's no reason this has to take that long. 30 seconds maximum for the current duck. Either put a propeller on him and get that thing driving fast, or just make the route smaller. And I would also say the meteorologist chart could be clearer. I have honestly no clue how to find all of them. If it wasn't for a plugin, I would have struggled for hours trying to figure these out. But overall, I think charting's great. And finally, the method I did the least is deep sea trawling. So I'm not going to comment too much on it because I haven't actually done it very much, but with yesterday's update, reducing the XP from the crystal extractor by about 20k per hour, this essentially cut the XP you'd get from deep sea trawling, at least for sailing, in half. The XP is so bad, and no, this does not need to be a competitive training method, nor should it, because the idea is that marlin, bluefin tuna, and halibut should be reasonably expensive because they are high tier fish. This doesn't need to be competitive, but currently, I don't know, it's like 20k an hour, and it's very high intensity. This is probably one of the spots that alleged experience distribution should have gone to. Just bump this back up to what it was pre-extractor nerf at least. I think 50 to 60k sailing XP per hour isn't too much to ask for, considering it is a high intensity hybrid method. So those are my thoughts on the skill and the recent blog posts in general. I think salvaging in its old state was kind of massaging some of the other problems this skill does have, because I think people are upset not only because their experience rates have been nerfed pretty significantly, but also they're just not another method they really want to do. I think if port tasks were more lucrative or the methods were a little bit more enjoyable, more streamlined, I think the pushback would be much less. But we'll see. I do have some level of faith in Jagex to get to a balanced state eventually, so we just gotta keep giving our feedback, and I'm sure we'll get there eventually. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. A little bit more of a ramble style. Maybe we'll do more for some future updates. Cheers. Peace.